This start speech. The first we introduce and honored to have Mr. Cole to give talk here. Okay, I can pass the microphone to Mr. Cole. So do you mind people raise questions?
No, sir.
Okay. People, at the end, please.
All right, 大家好. I apologize, my Mandarin is not good enough, or my Thai are not good enough to give this presentation in those languages. So if it's okay with you, I'll do it in English. And I believe you have a partial translation of the document that I prepared for this presentation. What I would like to start with is basically an overview of the current balance of power and recent developments that we have seen in the Taiwan Strait. I think even for non-military experts, it's become quite obvious that in recent years the balance of power has shifted. Back in the 1990s, when Li Nonghui was president here, the Taiwanese military still had a strong advantage in terms of the items that comprised their military. And at the time, the Chinese military was still very, very antiquated, both in terms of the equipment that they were able to field, as well as their ways of thinking in terms of how to operate in military operations. In the past 10 years or so, however, we have seen major investment in the Chinese military. Which is in a way it's natural, because the Chinese economy has been developing, and any developing country will eventually invest more money in their military. So part of it is just a natural progression. It's the natural modernization of forces, which explains why in the past decade or so, with the exception of 2010, the Chinese defense budget has grown in double digit every single year. To the point where last year their official military budget was close to 91.5 billion US dollars. Now we have to be careful. There is a major difference between the official defense budget in China and the actual one. There is lots of spending in the Chinese military that goes on that does not go reported or is not counted as being part of their annual defense budget. So the $91.5 billion figure is what the Chinese authorities are willing to let the world know. But there are numerous reports from the Pentagon and other think tanks in Japan and the United States and here in Taiwan that say that the actual budget is much higher than the $91.5 billion that they declared. To give a comparison, the defense budget in Taiwan for next year will be a little more than $10 billion, which is about 10 times smaller than the defense budget in China for last year. Now China, like any other country globally, is experiencing economic difficulties right now. They fail to acknowledge it. They deny that they're having trouble at home, but they certainly are. And it's pretty obvious that in the coming year or the next few years, they might not be able to invest as much money in their defense as they were doing prior to the global economic crisis. Then again, we have yet to see what the actual budget is going to be, but it's quite likely that the budget next year will go down substantially. But what it means, nevertheless, is in the past 10 or 15 years, China has been investing huge amounts of money in their military, both in acquiring weapons from abroad, mostly from Russia, which was more than happy to sell pretty much every single defense item that they had been developing. And China has also invested quite substantially in their domestic programs, so they have been developing new weapons platforms, oftentimes by stealing technology from Russia via Ukraine, with the example of buying one or two devices from Ukraine and then reverse engineering and making that a new Chinese platform instead. The implication is that in the past 6 months or so, we have seen Moscow being reluctant to sell very, very advanced military technology to China. because they're afraid that whatever it is that they sell, China will reverse engineer, develop their own platform, and then start competing with Russia in selling those arms to other countries. China does that with every type of technology, not only military, but this is something that they are known for doing as well. So we can expect a few clashes between Russia and China over military sales in the coming years. And Russia has its own interests, and like other countries in the region, Russia is becoming a bit nervous at China's rise in tensions. So what I intend to do today is briefly look at the developments in the Chinese military in the past 5 to 10 years. Then I will look at the current situation here in Taiwan in terms of military capabilities. And then, very humbly, I will make a few recommendations as to how Taiwan, cannot ignore the current realities in the Taiwan Strait, and B, how it can adapt to make sure that it can still defend its territory. I should also make it very clear, as is stated in one of the footnotes, is that I speak for myself. This presentation is not supported by the Taipei Times or Liberty Times Group or Jane's Defense Weekly or IHS. So this is mostly my own personal opinion, supported by different sources, and based on my observations. Ultimately, I do not even claim to know what Taiwanese themselves should do to defend their country. This is basically just an overview based on my observations as someone who gets paid to watch the Chinese military closely and the Taiwanese military as well. Yeah, so the monies that have been spent in China have allowed it to modernize every single sector of their military, from the People's Liberation Army to PLA Navy to PLA Air Force, and their second artillery as well, which is the unit that fields all the missiles that are being aimed at Taiwan. In terms of one of the major developments that we have seen in recent years, and the ones that has grabbed most attention, both in the region and globally, are developments in the Chinese Air Force. Earlier, what's no longer this year, early last year in January, just as the U.S. Defense Secretary was visiting Beijing, China was unveiling their J-20 stealth fighter, which is a 5th generation aircraft that is currently under development, and that is believed to be probably as good as the F-35 that is being developed by the United States and a NATO consortium, including my home country, Canada. China has also acquired lots of 4th generation aircraft that comprise their air force. 4th generation aircraft are like Taiwan's most advanced aircraft right now, which is the F-16AB that they obtained in 1992. So China has been fielding more and more advanced aircraft, both domestically developed and acquired from abroad. So much so that in terms of quality right now, the Chinese Air Force is at least as good as the Taiwanese Air Force. One major difference that oftentimes does not get noted is the fact that the Chinese Air Force has no fighting or combat experience, unlike the American Air Force that has waged a number of wars in recent years. Now, does Taiwan have war experience? No, it doesn't either. But the main difference, however, is that most of Taiwanese pilots for the F-16s are actually trained at Luke Air Force Base in the United States. So at least they have the advantage of training alongside people who have actual combat experience. And this is something that in an actual combat scenario could have an impact on the outcome. The main problem, though, is that China is now fielding a lot more aircraft than the Taiwanese Air Force is, which could be problematic even if your pilots are more experienced. If you have one experienced pilot facing 4 or 5 pilots, again, the balance is much more in China's favor than it is in Taiwan's. So one thing that we need to look at, and this applies to the Chinese Air Force, but this also applies to the other sectors of their military, is the sheer actual numbers of platforms that they are deploying. And in every single case, China has many more platforms than Taiwan has in its arsenal. This includes airplanes, this includes bombers, this includes destroyers, and obviously this includes submarines, where China has about 40 times more submarines than Taiwan does, at least combat-ready submarines. Another important aspect, and this is an immediate threat to Taiwan's security, is the short-range and medium-range missiles that China has been deploying targeting Taiwan, which now estimates put at between 1,500 and 1,600. What we need to look at here as well is not just the actual numbers, but the fact that those missiles, they've been decommissioning the older missiles and replacing them with newer ones, which means that they are more precise munitions. They are longer range, and some of them now have what we call the multiple submunitions, which means that one warhead, when it approaches a target, will explode before hitting the target, and then you have a bunch of little smaller munitions attacking a wider area. These developments have serious implications for the air defense systems fielded by Taiwan for two main reasons. When a hit-to-kill missile goes toward an incoming object, it can hone in on one target, but if that target suddenly divides and becomes 10 or 15 different targets, it's very difficult for that warhead to decide where to go. China also now has what we call decoys, so when the missile approaches Taiwan, it's going to let go of little flares and other objects that make it very difficult again for radar to detect the actual incoming warhead. Another problem, and to go back a little, is that longer range ballistic missiles need to go higher so that they can go further. But the higher a missile goes, when it comes down, it accelerates even more. So the faster that a missile approaches Taiwan, the more difficult it is again for radar to see it and for the defense systems to intercept it. So China is aware of this, and more they have been fielding longer range missiles. So this is going to be, in coming years, very challenging for Taiwan's air defense systems, not only in terms of identifying those targets, but it's just the sheer number as well. When you have 1,600 missiles aimed at you, even firing just a few hundred could easily overwhelm the defense systems that Taiwan has been acquiring and developing. The most advanced air defense system that Taiwan is fielding right now is the Patriot missile, the PAC-2 and PAC-3. Every single unit costs upwards of $300 million US, which means that right now, in terms of PAC-3s, Taiwan is hoping to acquire 6 altogether, and those have been released by the United States government. It's going to be a few years still before they are actually deployed and operational. Now, developing those missiles in China certainly does not cost $300 million per missile. So in terms of cost effectiveness, China can afford to field more and more missiles, but Taiwan cannot afford to deploy enough air defense systems to counter that threat. So this is something that we need to think about as well when we think about strategy for how Taiwan can defend itself. Another major development that's been making the news in the past 6 months or so is the fact that China has been working on their own aircraft carrier. The former Soviet Varyak that they initially acquired in the early 1990s, supposedly to be a floating casino in Macau. Now, after Ukraine sold the aircraft carrier, the vessel did not end up in Macau, but ended up in Liaoning province, where it was quickly refurbished and turned into an actual military platform. It took the Chinese a little while before they could do their first sea trial, mostly because that aircraft carrier did not come with the engines or the weapons system, so they needed to find ways to integrate engines And this is something that China had never done before. So that explains why it took them nearly a decade to be able to make that a viable platform. Now they have had 3 sea trials, but they have yet to do actual PLA Navy landings or takeoffs on the aircraft carrier. Again, for a number of reasons, this is a very challenging endeavor. Landing on an aircraft carrier is much more difficult than landing on an actual airstream because of movements, because of wind patterns and all that. And China is very image conscious right now. The last thing they want to do is attempt a landing at sea and for that aircraft to miss the aircraft carrier or explode on the landing deck. So what they have been doing instead is building mock aircraft carriers made of concrete in China proper, and they are doing training with their aircraft for landings there. So all that being said, what this means is that we probably don't need to be overly worried about the aircraft carrier immediately, because it's going to be a couple of more years at least before China can actually use the aircraft carrier to project forces abroad. Now, the official launch for the Variag is going to be in October next year to coincide with the anniversary of the founding of People's Republic of China. But even if it officially launched next year, again, this does not mean that they will be able to use that aircraft carrier to project force. So those are, in a nutshell, the major developments that we have been seeing in the Chinese military. Now, to turn to current political situation, well, to backtrack a little, another reason why China has been modernizing their military and fielding all those new weapons is not only for Taiwan. China is becoming, whether we like it or not, it is becoming a regional power. And what this means is that it wants to flex its muscles. It wants to show that it's the big brother in the neighborhood. Whether it's over sovereign issues in the South China Sea over the Spratly Islands, or in the East China Sea over the Diaoyutai, China has an interest in projecting more forces so that it's easier for it to lay claim to those areas. All these developments, Chinese officials have said, are not aimed specifically at Taiwan. In a way, this is true because some of the missiles that they have been developing, some of the destroyers that they have been fielding in the aircraft, would also have applications for conflict with the Philippines or Vietnam or other claimants in the South China Sea, or with Japan if it ever came to blows over the Diaoyutai or Senkaku for the Japanese. But that being said, despite China's claims that this is not aimed at Taiwan, almost every single platform that they have acquired or developed would also have applications for a Taiwan contingency. And this includes their Dongfeng 21D, the so-called aircraft carrier killer, the missile that they have been developing. Well, Taiwan does not have an aircraft carrier, so obviously that missile could not sink a Taiwanese aircraft carrier. However, it could easily make it dangerous for aircraft carrier battle group from the United States coming to assist Taiwan. It could make it difficult for them to come to the region and be confident that they won't be attacked. Now, to turn to Taiwanese force modernization during the same period. I think everyone here is aware that in recent years, the United States has come across as a difficult ally of Taiwan. A lot of people like to claim that this is because of former President Chen Shui-bian's policies. Personally, I think that if we look at the first few months of the George W. Bush administration, the United States actually was coming across as a willing partner in ensuring Taiwan's defense. They came out immediately with a $6.4 billion arms package for Taiwan. George Bush publicly said that he would do whatever it takes to defend Taiwan against Chinese aggression. And then there was a shift, and it was not in general, it wasn't Chen Shui-bian's fault, but it was the September 11 terrorist attacks in the United States. And all of a sudden, the United States was facing a whole different world and a whole different series of challenges. What with their invasion of Afghanistan to rid themselves of Al-Qaeda and Taliban support bases, and afterwards with their little adventure in Iraq, which turned out to be quite problematic. And in many of those cases, and this also includes the nuclear missile program in North Korea, in many of those instances, the United States needed assistance from China, or at least tacit support at the United Nations. So the United States could no longer dictate what it wanted to do. It required at least tacit support from China, especially on North Korea. Beijing has been very intelligent in using North Korea and making sure that while they're part of the denuclearization talks in North Korea, they're also making sure that North Korea does not abandon its nuclear program. So as long as this perdures, the United States needs China to negotiate with North Korea. So it really forced the Bush administration and then the Obama administration to pay closer attention to the impact that their support for Taiwan was having on their relations with China. This quickly translated into reluctance in Washington to sell certain weapons to Taiwan. This then became even worse when the legislature here in Taiwan would make it impossible for the Chen administration to get the money that they needed to buy the weapons that they already had agreed to buy from the United States. Little secret here, the KMT was controlling the legislature back then, so they made it impossible for Chen to actually get that money. The United States ran out of patience, and they said, well, if Taiwan is really not so committed to its own defenses, why should we worry? Why should we put our relations at risk with China over a country that we're no longer even sure is willing to defend itself? This is making a very complex situation sound a bit easier. There are other pressures at play here, but this is one of the guiding lines. Now, that being said, Taiwan has been able to obtain some high-profile platforms from the United States, and some of those are the Patriot missile systems. But those are hugely expensive platforms that more and more people wonder, are they really worth it in terms of ensuring Taiwan's defense? They send a clear political signal that the United States is willing to support Taiwan. The F-16 CDs that they have not been able to obtain. One of the reasons why they keep insisting is that if Washington were to say yes to the F-16 CDs, it would send a signal, again, to Beijing that the United States does support Taiwan. What the United States chose to do last year instead was to upgrade the 146 F-16AVs that Taiwan has right now. But again, it's a very expensive program. It's $5.2 billion US to upgrade aircraft. That once all those electronics and software and radar systems are installed, will make the F-16AVs quite capable. This will be a major boost to the Taiwanese Air Force. The problem is that that upgrade program does not include modernization of the actual aircraft itself. So even if you have advanced electronics on the aircraft, the airframe and the engines are getting older. So the implication is that they keep saying, okay, with the radars that we're going to be installing in the firing units and software, the aircraft is going to have a second life and it's going to be good for another 20 years. It's partly true, but the problem is that the actual airframe and the engines won't be able to last that long, because these materials face tremendous pressures when they fly and they do their maneuvers and all that. So this over time, this creates all kinds of mechanical problems, and the airframes won't be able to take it anymore. The same with the highly publicized upgrade to the IDF, or the Qinghuo, the domestic aircraft that Taiwan built in the 1980s. They are now modernizing nearly half of all those IDFs that they have here in Taiwan. The work is being done in Taichung. They're changing the firing software, they're changing the targeting systems, they're adding larger fuel tanks to give longer range to the aircraft, but they're not changing the engines and they're not changing the airframe. So once again, you have more advanced electronics on a platform that won't be able to last that long. So as I write in the paper, it's like installing this really, really expensive radio system in a car that's dying because it's too old and it's getting rusty. So it raises all kinds of questions as to whether it makes sense to spend those billions of dollars when their actual effectiveness in helping defend Taiwan is coming under question. Now, developing more modern weapons systems is a major endeavor which requires, again, large injections of money domestically or support from abroad. What Taiwan is facing right now, the major problem is that the United States imposes limits on the technologies that can be transferred to Taiwan. And part of this is a result of the Taiwan Relations Act of 1979, when Washington switched diplomatic relations from Taipei to Beijing. The TRA clearly states that the United States will support Taiwan in obtaining defensive capabilities, which means that any technology or the platform that is seen as offensive will be blocked by the U.S. State Department. So this has had an impact on Taiwan's ability to develop missile technology, for example. Despite this, moving on to the Ma-Ying-jeou administration, a lot of people have said that the Ma-Ying-jeou administration is killing national defense, that it's not serious on national defense, it's not serious on countering the Chinese military threat. A case can be made. Ma-Ying-jeou has said that the #1 enemy now is nature rather than China, and we have seen a shift in how the military prioritizes missions. We have seen fewer and fewer live fire exercises simulating a Chinese invasion. So in terms of preparedness, the armed forces right now are probably less well prepared than they were 5 or 10 years ago to counter an actual Chinese invasion or attack. There is also questions as to whether the top echelons in the military, and this goes all the way up to National Security Council and ultimately Ma-Ying-jeou, is that the lines have gotten blurred. For a lot of young Taiwanese soldiers right now, they're like, is China really the enemy? Because my general keeps telling me that no, they're part of my family, but we're having a little dispute and all that. And now nature is the main enemy, it's not China. And you see political developments across the Taiwan Strait where the Ma-Ying-jeou administration is trying to become, friends with China, and they're making all kinds of concessions, and it's now very, very difficult for someone in the armed forces to say clearly that yes, the enemy is China. Back in January last year, I went to Zhoufang in Pingdong, where they had their major missile test, the CSIST testing base.